The entire world is going to remember what the U.S. did here. And nothing would make Putin happier right now than to see Congress waver.
A fight over military aid in the U.S. and in Ukraine, another city falls to Russia. Some in the White House blame Congress, while another unlikely alliance emerges. Welcome to Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skenderis. Also ahead, the state of healthcare in Gaza is, according to the World Health Organization, beyond words. Services collapse at another hospital, leaving even more people without medical support. Plus, the story behind the classic story, beloved for generations.
The whole Sound of Music franchise really started with Maria's book, but Maria said, "I'll only sell it if you'll cast me." And of course, the answer was no.
How the Sound of Music's popularity endures, and the devoted fans who come as close as they can to the Von Trapps. According to some in the White House, the fall of another Ukrainian city is the fault of U.S. lawmakers. The White House saying frontline soldiers do not have the equipment they need because Congress has failed to approve more aid for Ukraine. The battle over a major national security spending package, which includes $60 billion for Ukraine, remains stalled. And the small but powerful group of lawmakers opposed to sending more U.S. support appears unwilling to budge. Katie Simpson reports from Washington.
Russian troops strike a Ukrainian tank, filling the vehicle with smoke and debris. A soldier inside has a video camera recording every anxious moment. The Ukrainians return fire as they move as quickly as they can to escape. It's believed to be some of the last fighting in the eastern Ukrainian town of Avdiivka, which is now fully under Russian control and is considered one of Ukraine's largest losses in this war.
We can get our land back, and Putin can lose.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his soldiers are lacking the supplies they need. And in a phone call to U.S. President Joe Biden on Saturday, he repeated his pleas for more weapons.
And the idea that now, when they're running out of ammunition, we walk away, I find it absurd.
Biden is openly frustrated that American lawmakers have not yet approved a national security spending package, which includes $60 billion for Ukraine. One of his senior officials went even further, blaming those lawmakers for the fall of Avdiivka. Adrienne Watson, the White House National Security Council spokeswoman, wrote on social media, "This is the cost of congressional inaction."
We're going to fight till we get them the ammunition they need and the capacity they need to defend themselves.
The aid package has already passed in the Senate. The next step is approval by the House, so it can then be sent to the president to be signed into law. While the bill has widespread bipartisan support, House Speaker Mike Johnson is refusing to call a vote. He says taxpayer dollars are better spent securing the southern U.S. border. Johnson is also a supporter of Donald Trump, who is against more Ukraine aid. And the pro-Trump wing of the party has threatened to remove Johnson as Speaker if he calls a vote.
He ought to understand that it is worth it if he has to lose his speakership in order to make sure that freedom survives.
Former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney says there's a new sense of urgency in approving this aid, given what's happened in Avdiivka, the revelation that Russia is developing a new space-based weapon, and the death of Alexei Navalny. It puts her in a rare point of agreement with Democrat and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Best price the U.S. can make Putin pay is to give Ukraine the help they need to fend off Putin's evil aggressions.
While pressure is mounting on Congress to act, it's unlikely anything will happen in the immediate future, as the House is on vacation for the next 2 weeks. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
The healthcare crisis in Gaza is getting worse. The Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis is no longer functional, according to the World Health Organization. It was made non-operational after an Israeli raid this week. The IDF says Hamas was operating inside the hospital. Michelle Song has more on the day's events.
A paramedic holds a child in his arms and wipes his face. The boy is one of 18 injured Palestinians crammed in a single ambulance headed to a hospital in central Gaza after a shelling, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. Israeli airstrikes have killed and wounded tens of thousands of Palestinians since the war began, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Today, the World Health Organization says one of the last functioning hospitals in Gaza, Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis, is no longer operational, but as many as 200 patients remain inside. There is no safe place in Gaza, says Ahmed Mohammed, who lives in Khan Younis. He, like many Palestinians, are struggling to stay alive. Now, making things worse, a top U.S. envoy says the U.S. will permanently stop funding UNRWA, one of the main sources of humanitarian aid to Gaza, after Israel alleged several staff members of the UN aid agency took part in the October 7 attacks.
We're all in a desperate phase. We're all angry.
Isra Al-Safin is a Palestinian Canadian. Her family is sheltering in Rafah and she wants to bring them to Canada before a possible ground incursion into the city. But the process is taking too long.
It's not going to come here and just not do anything. They want just to be away from what's going on.
Time is running out. Negotiations for a pause in fighting and the release of hostages have stalled. And today, Israel's prime minister says he rejects talks by the international community about the creation of a Palestinian state. Such an accord will be reached only through direct negotiations between the parties, Benjamin Netanyahu says. This weekend, Netanyahu dismissed calls for an early election, insisting he will stay in power until at least 2026. Protesters unhappy with the status quo took to the streets in Tel Aviv.
I really want an election in Israel so we can vote for a government that really cares about the people.
On Tuesday, Algeria will put forth a motion at the UN Security Council calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The U.S. has signaled it will block it, as it has done with similar motions multiple times since the start of the war. Michelle Song, CBC News, Toronto.
Israeli cabinet minister Benny Gantz says Israel will restrict access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan. Gantz confirmed the news on X but did not provide specifics. This area of Old Jerusalem is considered one of the holiest sites for Muslims and Jews, and it's been at the center of violence between Israelis and Palestinians in recent years. The holy month of Ramadan begins in early March. Meanwhile, the International Court of Justice wants Israel to report by Friday to show the measures it's taking to abide by orders the court issued last month, including one on ending incitement to genocide. One of Israel's biggest backers in that case is Germany. But Germany's support of Israel at The Hague has angered the descendants of victims of Germany's first genocide. As Rebecca Collard reports, people in Namibia are trying to remind Germans their country still has many crimes to answer for.
When Nandi Mathaingo heard that Germany plans to intervene in Israel's genocide case at the International Court of Justice, he was outraged.
Germany apparently has the moral ground to lecture the world on what is a genocide and what is not a genocide.
Mathaingo represents the Over Herero Genocide Foundation. Between 1904 and 1908, Germany killed an estimated 70,000 Nama and Herero people on the territory that is today part of Namibia, after an uprising against German colonial rule. Some 80% of Herero and half the Nama people were killed in what is now seen by many historians as the first genocide of the 20th century. Namibian leaders say Germany's pledge to intervene in Israel's genocide case shows Germany has yet to learn from its history of committing two genocides.
By associating with someone who is accused of genocide, your own history is reviewed, so it has huge negative repercussions for Germany's picture in the international community.
Stefan Tellmann is an international law expert at the University of Bonn, and he says that Germany's intervention is political, not on a legal basis.
And of course, it will also, make it more difficult to come to reconciliation with Namibia.
German officials have not responded directly to Namibian criticism and have dismissed any connection between the Holocaust, the Namibian genocide, and Israel's actions in Gaza. We reject the historical comparison, said spokesperson Christian Wagner at a press conference in January. But Mata Ingo disagrees. Women in Namibia were raped by German soldiers, producing biracial children, including Mata Ingo's own grandmother. A German doctor, Eugene Fischer, conducted experiments on them, deeming them inferior to their German fathers. That became the foundation of Nazi race theory, and one of Fischer's students, Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, went on to carry out horrific experiments on prisoners in the Auschwitz concentration camp.
It all started here. It's a continuation of what was started here. The concentration camps, being worked to death, the whole racist ideas.
Mata Ingo describes growing up, watching the descendants of German soldiers and settlers caring for their graves on his people's ancestral land. He describes realizing his dispossession as a child, understanding why neighboring white farms had better, more fertile land, and why his grandmother looked like them but wasn't. And he says it's this history that forms his understanding today.
The world really has been thrown into this binary choice between being for the genocide committing states of Israel and Germany, and those who says they don't support that.
Germany prides itself in what it calls remembrance culture. All over the country there are monuments to and reminders of the crimes of the Holocaust. But it's rare to find anything about Germany's first genocide. However, Germany's pledge to intervene in Israel's genocide trial is bringing that history to the forefront. Rebecca Collard for CBC News, Berlin.
Coming up, tiny forests, big impact. A Japanese idea is taking root in Toronto with the goal of bringing more of the benefits of nature to urban areas. But not everyone thinks smaller is better. That story is still ahead on Your World Tonight. Meanwhile, family doctors play a key role in Canada's healthcare system. They're often the first call that people make when they're sick. But there aren't enough of them. Millions of Canadians don't have a primary care physician. The federal government is touting billions of dollars in healthcare funding for the provinces. But, as JP Tasker reports, that's a small remedy for an increasingly big problem.
For a country that says they're wealthy as Canada, it doesn't make sense, right?
Jane Williams and her husband Steve have been waiting 3 years for a family doctor.
And I keep reading how there's more people coming in the system, but it's just, I don't seem to be moving up that list.
The Victoria couple are getting older, and the thought of going without access to primary care is stirring up some anxiety.
Like, I can't go and order myself blood tests.
That's how Bill Wishart in Cape Breton feels too.
The older I get, the more things are going to start to break down.
The 65-year-old forestry technician has been injured on the job in the past. He's been without a regular family doctor for years.
And I just worry sometimes that I'm going to miss something myself.
There are just 3 of the 6.5 million Canadians that don't have access to a family doctor, according to data collected by the Our Care Initiative. It's a crisis that experts say has caused untold harm in cases of preventable death and disease.
You know, I really worry about this.
Dr. David Barber is a family doctor in Kingston, Ontario, who speaks for the Ontario Medical Association.
You know, I get really scared thinking about the patients that won't have access to the healthcare system.
He says the physician shortage is only going to get worse. A large number of doctors in Canada are nearing retirement. In Ontario alone, nearly 2 million people have a family doctor who is over the age of 65.
Like, what's the plan for that? There's no plan.
There are fewer reinforcements ready to take over. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is touting a cash injection as one fix to the shortage.
We've committed $200 billion over the next decade to strengthen public health care in Canada.
Some of that money will be earmarked for new medical residency spots to boost enrollment, which has been stagnant for the last 10 years. Only 30% of new medical residents choose to work in family medicine, according to the latest medical school data. That's down from 34% 10 years ago.
I talked to the residents, and they have no interest in doing cradle-to-grave care.
Employment Minister Randy Boisneau.
The money's there, and the provinces and the universities can allocate it, and it should allocate it in these spaces.
But the number of new spaces is just a drop in the bucket, says Dr. Barber.
Every year, 500,000 people in Ontario are losing their family doctor, are losing access to the healthcare system, right?
Ottawa is poised to launch a multi-billion-dollar pharmacare program in the coming weeks. Some doctors and their patients say the federal government's focus should be fixing the healthcare system we already have. JP Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
Intimate partner violence has been called an epidemic in Canada, and one without an obvious cure. This issue was brought to the fore again a week ago today after 2 women and 3 children were found dead in rural Manitoba. The man charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder is the partner of one of the women and the father of the children. Karen Pauls has more.
I'm numb. I don't know what to feel. I'm angry.
Nancy Clearwater mourns for the victims. Her daughter, 30-year-old Amanda Clearwater, Amanda's 3 children, aged 6 and 4 years and 10 weeks, and 17-year-old Maya Grattan, part of an extended foster family. Juliet Hastings is her mother.
I just want to see my baby. I want to hold her. I love her so much.
All of them killed last week in locations around southern Manitoba. Ryan Manakisik, partner, father, caregiver, accused of killing them.
5 first-degree murder charges.
Manakisik was out on bail in court-ordered addictions and mental health treatment programs. In 2019, a judge told him to get help, saying, if you don't do something, eventually it's going to cost you your family.
I had a feeling.
Hastings says she contacted child welfare officials because she was worried about her daughter's safety.
Something dark was just festering, and I just didn't want my daughter to be caught in the crossfire.
The phone's been ringing. We've been busy. It's been a chaotic week here at the shelter.
Down the highway, staff at Genesis House are hearing from women who are distressed about the news. Sophie Gerbrandt is responsible for resource and community development at the women's shelter.
I think it brings up a lot of red flags for folks who are in relationships already that are having different forms of abuse. It's also triggering for people who have had challenging relationships in the past, even if they're no longer in those situations.
According to Statistics Canada, a woman is killed by her partner or former partner every 6 days. Manitoba and Saskatchewan have the highest rates of intimate partner violence in Canada. Indigenous women and those in rural areas are even more at risk. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says he's committed to getting answers in this case. He's open to a potential inquiry.
It's to ask the question, what went wrong? And more importantly, how are we going to fix it? How are we going to protect children, protect women, protect young people?
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he's invested in a strategy to combat intimate partner violence.
Provide supports, whether it's mental health supports, addiction supports, to the range of contributing factors.
Back at the women's shelter, Gerbrandt says they're also working with at-risk men.
Prevention is a huge piece of the puzzle. At Genesis House, we address men and abusers, but we're just not fully equipped at Genesis House to provide those services.
And she says it gets complicated when the same organization is supporting both the alleged perpetrators and the victims of abuse. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winkler, Manitoba.
Tiny forests are a growing trend. They only take up small plots of land, but these densely packed woodlands grow fast, support urban wildlife, and capture carbon. It's actually a decades-old idea that came from Japan. As Ben Shingler tells us, it's now springing up here in Canada.
Students spread mulch at John Abbott College, west of Montreal. In all, 600 trees and shrubs are planted in a plot of land about the size of a tennis court.
We're planting 3 trees per square meter, so it's a lot.
It is a lot, and that's the point. Jorge Rojas Arias is with the organization Arbre Evolution. He says the idea is simple.
The trees, they are like entering competition between themselves in order to search light, so they will grow faster.
Scenes like this are playing out in many Canadian communities because tiny forests have big benefits. Since they grow so quickly, research suggests they sequester more carbon than regular tree plantations. They also require little maintenance after the first few years and serve as a habitat for birds, butterflies, and insects. Chris Levesque is a biology teacher at John Abbott.
I think it's getting attention because it's a direct response to the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And it's a model that's fairly easy to implement in urbanized areas.
The tiny forest method was first developed by a Japanese botanist, Akira Miyawaki. It has spread not only to Canada, but also Europe, Asia, and the US. But there are also questions about this approach.
Really fast-growing trees can have, structural consequences to that.
Because of that, Todd Irvin says in some cases, tiny forests aren't the best fit. The Toronto arborist says they could be difficult to maintain over the long term.
In 15 to 20 years, you're sitting in a situation where there's going to be a significant amount of maintenance. Some of those large trees are going to be shaded out, and they will begin to die.
And it's still not totally clear what these forests will look like even further down the line. One of the big ideas behind the Miyawaki method is to include the community in the planting. And that's one reason why spirits are so high back at John Abbott College.
I think the experience of planting, it's really a good way of connect with nature. So everyone here comes out and they are really satisfied with their day.
As tiny forests grow in popularity, there are likely many more such days to come. Ben Shingler, CBC News, Montreal.
And if you want to hear more about tiny forests, Ben Shingler has a doc on the podcast What on Earth with Laura Lynch. Catch that on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, with the 2024 Olympic Games in Paris fast approaching, young athletes are trying to catch the attention of talent scouts in Montreal today. The event is a partnership between the Canadian Olympic Committee and sponsor RBC. A group of lucky athletes will qualify for funding and support, which could bring them one step closer to the Olympic dream. Kwabena Oduro reports.
Pro volleyball player Devin Cora is hoping to impress coaches at this free talent search.
I just want to do it for as long as I can. So whether that gets me to the Olympics or I get a really cool life of travel, it's the dream.
Originally from Calgary, Cora plays volleyball in Germany. This program is for Canadian athletes between 14 and 25 years old. Cora is 25 and says this is a last chance attempt.
The funding for beach volleyball is minimal, and so a lot of the times we have to put forth the money to start traveling ourselves until the tournaments start paying out or sponsorships come through. So we always look for creative ways to try and get cash.
Now in its 9th year, the program has already seen some success, with 13 Olympians and 7 Canadian Olympic medalists, including Toronto's Avalon Westneys, who won gold in rowing in Tokyo, Manitoba's Kelsey Mitchell, who also brought home a gold medal from Tokyo in track cycling, and Pierce Lepage is the reigning decathlon world champion. Former gymnast and current freestyle ski Canada athlete Louis Groulot was discovered through this program.
It motivates me to do the best I can in my sport to try to reach them.
Olympian Florence Meyer represented Canada in Tokyo, and in a month she'll find out if she's going to Paris to compete in kayak cross, a new sport being introduced in the 2024 Summer Games. Meyer shared her experiences with these hopefuls.
So I talk about, loving what you do and making it a bit easier when you love something to persevere through the obstacles. And obviously there are going to be some challenges, and to just be prepared for that the road is not easy, obviously, but it's a fun one.
While the hopefuls show off their skills, coaches are on hand taking notes of which athletes could help their teams in future Olympics. Jonathan Kavar is with Speed Skating Canada.
It's excellent. We get to know who they are. We get to learn about them, and we can see how hard they're working and developing their skills, not only as speed skaters but as athletes. And it's interesting to see them competing against other athletes from other sports.
Even as a pro athlete, Cora says the talent pool here is strong.
I'm always humbled by I get beat by someone who's 17, 18, and it's what can you do?
Both Cora and Groulot are hoping they'll both get to represent Canada at the Summer and Winter Olympics as early as 2026. Kwabena Oduro, CBC News, Montreal.
In Ottawa. After several weeks of warm weather forced its closure, the Rideau Canal Skateway reopened today. But there's a catch. Overnight snowfall made it impossible for crews to flood the skateway. Officials say the ice is in poor condition and recommend people walk instead of skate. You are listening to Your World Tonight from CBC News. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can hear Your World Tonight and other CBC radio programs wherever you are on your favorite podcast app. Monday in many parts of the country is Family Day, and one way to relax on a well-earned day off, if you have one, is by watching a favorite movie. Maybe something about a famous family, like the Von Trapps, for instance, who were immortalized in The Sound of Music. But before their tale of escaping Nazi-occupied Austria got the Hollywood treatment, it was captured in a book, which came out 75 years ago in 1949. As Steve Futterman tells us, that story still resonates today.
If you've ever seen the movie, you can probably visualize in your mind the opening scene. Julie Andrews running and dancing, arms outstretched in the lush green mountains. The music gradually gets louder, and then we hear the opening song.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
The 1965 film is considered an all-time classic. When the book came out in 1949, it had modest success and did receive some early attention.
The whole Sound of Music franchise really started with Maria's book, and Hollywood was interested in the book, but Maria said, no, only I can play the role, so I'll only sell it if you'll cast me. And of course the answer was no.
Tom Santopietro is the author of the Sound of Music story. Eventually, in 1956, a film was made in Germany. Then came the Broadway musical, then the film.
Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start.
If you want to find a place in North America that will bring you as close as you can to the Sound of Music and the Von Trapp family, you would probably end up in Stowe, Vermont. I'm standing outside the Trapp Family Lodge.
One of my earliest movie memories was Sound of Music, watching it with my mom. She loves the movie, and it's pretty incredible. My first time here ever.
Every year, thousands make the pilgrimage to see where the Von Trapp family lived when they came to the U.S.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day, so we're going to come have lunch and do some exploration and see the lodge and get a glimpse of the history here.
The Von Trapp family members portrayed in the film are no longer alive, but there are some descendants.
Sam? Oh my gosh.
The day we were there, we met a grandchild.
So I'm Sam Von Trapp, and I'm 51 years old, live here in Stowe, Vermont, and Maria Von Trapp was my grandmother.
Growing up, Sam Von Trapp was aware of his family's fame, but did not embrace it.
We didn't talk about it, we didn't watch it, and you weren't going to catch us singing it out loud.
Cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells and sleigh bells. And
At the lodge, people immerse themselves in the story.
Amazing to be here knowing that the history is that deep here, really, and you can feel it.
For those who appeared in the film, it was a life-changing experience.
I'm Angela Cartwright, and I played Brigitte Von Trapp. None of us believed that there was going to be this kind of, evergreen movie that people would still be so in love with.
So why does the film endure? Those who come to visit the lodge say it's quite simple.
At its most basic level, it's about people overcoming very stunning challenges and family and love. It sounds cliche when you say it, but that's often some of the most profound truths.
And 75 years after his grandmother wrote the book that led to all this, Sam Von Trapp says the film is still thriving.
The Sound of Music has been seen by an estimated over 1 billion people, and I think I heard that number maybe a couple decades ago, so by now who knows how many have seen it.
Steve Futterman for CBC News, Stowe, Vermont.
Bless my homeland forever.
Well, as you'd expect, The Sound of Music scooped up plenty of awards when it came out in 1965, including Oscars for Best Picture and Best Director. Julie Andrews won a Best Actress Golden Globe. She was up for a BAFTA, but didn't win. Today, the Best Leading Actress BAFTA went to Emma Stone for Poor Things. But this year's big BAFTA's winner is Oppenheimer. It's the film about American scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer and his role in developing the atomic bomb during the Second World War. The film scooped up Best Supporting Actor for Robert Downey Jr., Best Leading Actor for Cillian Murphy, Best Director for Christopher Nolan, and Best Film, as well as Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and also Best Original Score, which was composed by 39-year-old Swede Ludwig Göransson and includes some, at times, frenetic violins. On YouTube, Göransson explained how this section came together.
I wanted it to go faster and faster and faster and faster the whole time. But then the tricky point was, how can we record this live? It would have been easy to just have stopped every 2 bars. We did that too, but you don't get that magical flow that you only get with live musicians playing together in a room. We worked on this piece for a week, every day, and tried and played it over and over and over again, and the results are marvelous.
We'll leave you tonight with a bit more of Ludwig Göransson's Oppenheimer score on Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for listening.